The rain poured relentlessly, hammering the rusted metal roof of the small mechanic's garage. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, and with each crash of thunder, the flickering neon light outside cast eerie shadows on the wet pavement. The mechanic wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag, ready to close up for the night. Business had been slow, and all he wanted was a hot meal and some sleep. Just as he reached for the switch to turn off the lights, a loud bang echoed through the streets. Not thunder, something different. His instincts kicked in. Peering through the rain-streaked window, he spotted a pair of headlights flickering at the edge of the road. A car had stalled right outside his garage. He hesitated for a moment. It was late, and he had already locked the main entrance. But something felt off. The way the vehicle had rolled to a stop, the urgency of the situation, it wasn't just a car breakdown. Grabbing his raincoat, he stepped outside, immediately drenched by the downpour. The cold water seeped into his boots, but he trudged forward, shielding his face from the wind. As he approached, he saw a woman sitting inside, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her breath fogging up the window. He tapped on the glass. "Hey, you okay?" The woman startled, her eyes wide with panic. She fumbled to lower the window, her hands trembling. My car it stopped working," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the rain. The mechanic glanced around. The road was empty, no other cars in sight. The gas station down the street had already closed for the night. Something about her seemed wrong. Not in a bad way, but as if she wasn't supposed to be here. "Pop the hood," he said, stepping back. The woman hesitated, then reached for the lever. The hood released with a dull clunk, steam hissing from underneath. Lifting it, the mechanic shined his flashlight over the engine. The problem was clear: water had gotten into the ignition system. A simple fix, but in this storm, it would take some time. "You're lucky you broke down here," he muttered, wiping his soaked hands. "Give me a few minutes." The woman nodded but kept glancing over her shoulder, her wet hair sticking to her face. The mechanic worked quickly, but he could feel her eyes on him. "You from around here?" he asked, trying to break the tension. She hesitated before answering. "No. Just passing through." That didn't explain why she looked so terrified. A few minutes later, he closed the hood and wiped the rain off his face. "Try it now." She turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared back to life. She exhaled sharply, relief flooding her features. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much." "No problem," he said. But as he stepped back, he noticed something. A dark SUV was parked a few blocks down, its headlights off. The woman noticed it too. Her entire body tensed. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again. She bit her lip, then looked at him with something between gratitude and regret. "You have no idea what you've just done for me." And with that, she shifted into drive and sped off into the rain. The mechanic stood there, watching her taillights disappear into the storm. Something told him, this wasn't over. The mechanic stood in the rain for a long moment, watching the woman's taillights fade into the storm. His gut told him something wasn't right. It wasn't just a routine car breakdown, there was fear in her eyes, urgency in her voice. And then there was that SUV. Even as he turned back toward his garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something bigger than himself. Shaking off the chill, he locked up for the night and headed home. His small house, just a few blocks from the garage, was nothing special: one bedroom, an old recliner that had seen better days, and a kitchen that always smelled like motor oil no matter how much he cleaned. He made himself a quick meal, but his mind wasn't on the food. "You have no idea what you've just done for me." Why had she said that? Why did she look so scared? And who was in that SUV? Pushing the thoughts aside, he collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. The rain continued to pound against the window, a steady rhythm that eventually lulled him into a restless sleep. The next morning. The storm had passed, but the sky remained dull and gray. The mechanic arrived at his garage early, hoping to bury himself in work and forget about the strange encounter. By mid-morning, the usual customers trickled in, an old farmer with a busted truck, a kid with a dirt bike that wouldn't start. Routine jobs. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that feeling, that gnawing unease, wouldn't leave him. It wasn't until lunch that things took a turn. A black car with tinted windows rolled up to the shop. It wasn't the same SUV he'd seen last night, but something about it put him on edge. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, wearing a sharp black suit that didn't belong anywhere near an auto shop. He adjusted his cuffs as he walked toward the garage with a calm, practiced air, like a man used to being in control. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward, his posture tense. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You helped someone last night." The mechanic's pulse quickened. "What's it to you?" The man reached into his coat pocket, and for a split second, the mechanic braced himself, half expecting to see a gun. Instead, the man pulled out a business card. "She wants to thank you," he said, handing it over. The mechanic hesitated before taking it. The card was thick, expensive-looking, with only an address printed on it. No name. No phone number. He looked back up at the man. "Who is she?" The man's smile didn't waver. "She'll explain when you get there." And just like that, he turned and walked back to his car. The mechanic watched as the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the road. His gut screamed at him to stay out of it. Whatever this was, it had nothing to do with him. But as he turned the card over in his hands, curiosity got the best of him. He had to know. An unfamiliar address. Later that afternoon, he closed up the shop and plugged the address into his phone. It wasn't far, just outside of town, past the hills where the houses were bigger, richer, untouchable. As he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake. When he finally pulled up to the location, his suspicions were confirmed. The house wasn't just big, it was a mansion. A long, winding driveway led up to a modern estate surrounded by tall gates and security cameras. The kind of place that made men like him, men who worked with their hands, men who lived paycheck to paycheck, feel like they didn't belong. Yet here he was. A uniformed guard stood at the entrance. The moment he stopped his truck, the guard approached. "Name?" The mechanic hesitated. "I was invited." The guard glanced at his clipboard, nodded, then gestured toward the gates, which slowly opened. His truck felt out of place as he drove up the pristine driveway. By the time he reached the front of the mansion, the door had already opened. And standing there, no longer soaking wet, no longer trembling, was the woman from the storm. She was different now. Composed. Elegant. Powerful. "You came," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. The mechanic got out of his truck, his boots leaving damp prints on the polished stone. "I guess I'm just full of bad decisions." Her smile faded, replaced with something serious. "There's something you need to know," she said. And then, from inside the house, a phone rang. The woman's expression darkened. She turned away and answered, keeping her voice low, but the mechanic still caught a few words. "It's not safe. We don't have much time." The moment she hung up, she looked at him, her eyes filled with urgency. "I have to show you something," she said. The mechanic glanced back at his truck. He could still walk away. But something told him this was bigger than him now. He had already crossed the line. And whatever came next, there was no going back. The mechanic followed the woman into the massive house, his boots leaving faint traces of dampness on the marble floors. His mind was still trying to catch up with everything: last night's storm, the strange SUV, the suited man with the cryptic invitation. And now, standing in the foyer of this mansion, he realized something he hadn't before. This woman wasn't just someone in trouble. She was someone important. She led him through a long corridor, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The walls were lined with art, expensive, old, the kind he'd only seen in museums or magazines. The further they walked, the heavier the silence grew. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hallway. She hesitated before opening it. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, turning to him. "I didn't mean to involve you in any of this." He folded his arms, studying her. "Yeah? Well, you did." She nodded slowly. "And for that, I owe you an explanation." She pushed open the door. Inside was a dimly lit office, its walls lined with bookshelves. A large wooden desk sat at the center, and behind it was a security monitor, displaying live camera feeds of different locations, her driveway, the front gate, and even an aerial view of the estate. The mechanic's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just some rich house, is it?" The woman exhaled, rubbing her temples. "No. It's not." She walked over to the desk and grabbed a folder. "I don't have much time to explain, so I need you to listen carefully." The mechanic didn't move. He just waited. She opened the folder, revealing a photograph of herself. But it wasn't a casual picture. It looked like an official document, government issued. And next to her image, in bold letters, was a name. Not the name she had given him. A completely different identity. She met his gaze, waiting for a reaction. He said nothing. She sighed. "I work for people who don't officially exist." Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, the mechanic spoke. "You're in trouble." She let out a bitter laugh. "That's an understatement." She paced behind the desk. "2 nights ago, I was carrying information. The kind of information that could ruin powerful people. And the second they found out I had it, they sent people after me." The mechanic ran a hand down his face. "You're telling me I stopped to help a fugitive?" She gave him a sharp look. "I'm not a criminal. But the people who are chasing me, they don't care about that." He let that sink in. He wasn't sure whether he believed her, but what did it matter now? He had already been dragged into this. Then he remembered something. "The SUV," he said. "That night. Someone was watching you." Her expression darkened. "They were." The mechanic swallowed hard. "And now they're watching me too, aren't they?" She nodded. "That's why I brought you here." She reached into the drawer and pulled out a flash drive. She held it up. "This is what they want." The mechanic stared at it. It was so small, so insignificant looking, yet it had caused so much chaos. "I need to get this to the right people," she said. "But I can't do it alone." The mechanic shook his head. "Whoa, hold on. I fix cars. I don't get involved in whatever this is." Her voice softened. "You already are." He clenched his jaw. She was right. The second that suited man showed up at his garage, his normal life had ended. But still, what was she asking of him? "Why me?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because you helped me when you didn't have to. That tells me something about you." The mechanic let out a humorless laugh. "You don't even know me." Her eyes didn't waver. "I know enough." He exhaled. "What exactly do you need me to do?" She walked toward him, placing the flash drive in his hand. "I need you to keep this safe," she said. "No matter what happens." The mechanic looked down at the tiny device. He had no idea what was on it. No idea why it was so important. But something told him, his life was never going to be the same again. The sound that changed everything. Just as he was about to speak, a loud noise erupted outside. A deep, powerful sound, the unmistakable hum of a helicopter approaching. His head snapped toward the window. Through the trees, he could see it, a black chopper descending fast. The woman's face went pale. "They found me." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The mechanic's heart pounded. "What do we do?" She grabbed his wrist. We run. And before he could protest, she pulled him toward a back exit, shoving a key into his palm. This leads to a car, she said, her voice urgent. Take it. Drive. I'll find you. The mechanic's pulse raced. Wait, what about you? She looked at him, her eyes fierce, unshaken. Just go. And with that, she turned and ran in the opposite direction. The mechanic hesitated only a second. Then, with the sound of the helicopter growing louder, he bolted out the door and into the night. The mechanic sprinted through the darkness, the pounding of his boots barely audible over the roaring helicopter overhead. His breathing was ragged, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he clutched the key the woman had given him. Somewhere behind him, he heard the deep thud-thud-thud of boots against the pavement, men moving in formation. They were coming. He had no idea who they were. Cops? Government agents? Mercenaries? All he knew was that she had told him to run, and that's exactly what he was doing. Ducking behind a set of tall hedges, he fumbled with the key, glancing frantically around. Where was the car? Then, under the dim glow of a security light, he saw it. A sleek black SUV, its tinted windows concealing whatever was inside. His heart pounded harder. This wasn't just some car. This was a getaway vehicle. The woman had planned for this. He yanked open the driver's door, barely registering the state-of-the-art dashboard, the GPS screen flashing a preset route. The engine roared to life the second he turned the key. Suddenly, a sharp voice rang out in the night. Stop where you are. The mechanic didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas. The chase begins. Tires screeched against the pavement as he peeled out of the driveway, the SUV's powerful engine launching him forward. In the rearview mirror, he saw figures dressed in black, some holding rifles, others shouting into radios. The helicopter pivoted in midair, its spotlight locking onto his vehicle. A second later, gunshots rang out. The mechanic's hands clenched around the wheel as he swerved hard to the right, the sound of bullets pinging off metal making his stomach drop. This was real. This was life or death. Eyes darting to the GPS, he saw the blinking blue line indicating the route she had set up for him. Where was it leading him? The SUV tore through the night, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Behind him, the helicopter continued its pursuit, its beam illuminating every inch of the highway. Then, headlights. In the distance, a convoy of black vehicles appeared, blocking the road ahead. A trap. The mechanic cursed under his breath, scanning his options. Left turn, an empty side road. Right turn, a steep hill leading to the dense woods. Straight ahead, certain capture. No choice. He yanked the wheel left. Into the darkness. The SUV skidded onto the narrow dirt path, kicking up gravel as it plunged into the woods. Branches scraped against the windows, the uneven ground making the vehicle bounce violently. The helicopter's spotlight swept the trees, but the canopy was too thick, it couldn't see him anymore. He exhaled sharply, but he wasn't safe yet. Checking the GPS, he saw that the route continued deeper into the forest. Where was he going? The safe house. After nearly an hour of navigating through winding dirt roads, the GPS chimed. Destination reached. The mechanic slowed the SUV, scanning the area. Nothing but trees. Then, out of the shadows, a wooden cabin emerged, barely visible under the moonlight. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Something didn't feel right. But he had no other options. He pulled up to the cabin, cutting the engine. Silence. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped out of the car, his eyes darting around. He approached the cabin door and knocked once. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The mechanic turned back toward the SUV. And froze. A man stood behind him. Tall. Dressed in black. Expression unreadable. Before the mechanic could react, the man spoke. Give me the flash drive. His voice was calm, steady. Deadly. The mechanic's pulse skyrocketed. I don't know what you're talking about, he lied. The man smirked. Don't play dumb. We know she gave it to you. The mechanic's mind raced. If they knew about the flash drive, that meant she was caught. Or worse. Before he could process that thought, the man took a step forward. You have two choices, he said. Hand it over, or we take it. The fight for survival. The mechanic knew one thing. If they got their hands on the drive, it was over. Whatever information was on it, it was worth killing for. Without thinking, he lunged. The man was caught off guard for half a second, just enough time for the mechanic to swing a fist into his jaw. The man stumbled back, but he wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the shadows. The mechanic barely had time to react before they grabbed him, forcing him to the ground. A sharp pain shot through his ribs as one of them kicked him hard, knocking the air from his lungs. He gasped, struggling, but they held him down. A hand reached into his jacket, searching. He thrashed violently, refusing to let them take it. Then, a gunshot. The grip on him loosened. One of the men collapsed. The mechanic barely had time to process it before another shot rang out. And then, standing in the shadows, holding a silenced pistol, was her. She was alive. She moved fast, taking down the remaining man with brutal efficiency. The last one standing staggered backward, eyes wide. You. Before he could finish, she shot him too. The mechanic lay on the ground, panting. The woman stepped forward, holding out a hand to help him up. You, he could barely get the words out. I thought. No time, she cut him off, pulling him to his feet. She scanned the bodies, her expression unreadable. They'll send more, she muttered. Then she turned to him, eyes fierce. You need to listen to me very carefully. He swallowed hard. I'm listening. She stepped closer, gripping his arm. This isn't just about me anymore. Her gaze locked onto his. This is about you. And for the first time, the mechanic understood. He wasn't just a random stranger who had helped a woman in the rain. He had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. And now, there was no going back. The mechanic's heart pounded as the woman tightened her grip on his arm, her eyes burning with urgency. This isn't just about me anymore, she repeated. They know about you now. Rain dripped from the trees above, the sound mixing with his ragged breathing. He looked around at the three men sprawled in the dirt, their bodies still, their weapons useless beside them. Who are they? He asked, his voice hoarse. People who don't like being exposed, she said grimly. She slipped her gun back into a hidden holster and reached for his wrist. We need to go. More will come. He pulled back slightly, his head spinning. This is insane, he muttered. I fix cars. I don't, he gestured to the bodies, to the darkness closing in around them. This isn't my world. Her jaw clenched. And yet, here you are. She wasn't wrong. Something about the way she said it, like she'd been through this before, made his gut twist. The woman exhaled and softened her voice. Look. I didn't mean for you to get involved. But you saved me that night, and now they see you as part of the problem. The mechanic let that sink in. His old life, the simple, predictable one, was gone. If he walked away now, he knew exactly what would happen. They would come for him. And he wouldn't see it coming. The woman must have sensed his hesitation. She stepped closer, her eyes steady. There's a place we can go. But we need to leave now. The mechanic took one last look at the dark forest, the lifeless men, the eerie quiet. Then, with a deep breath, he nodded. Let's go. The escape. They sprinted to the SUV, the woman taking the driver's seat this time. She moved with precision, her hand steady as she gunned the engine. The mechanic barely had time to buckle in before the vehicle lurched forward, bouncing over the uneven dirt path. The forest blurred around them, the headlights slicing through the misty darkness. "How long until more show up?" he asked. "They're probably already tracking us," she admitted, her eyes flicking to the side mirrors. "We need to stay ahead of them." He glanced at the GPS, still displaying the route she had set up earlier. "Where are we going?" She hesitated. "A safe house." The mechanic's stomach tightened. "Another one?" She shot him a sharp look. "The last one wasn't exactly safe, was it?" He didn't argue. The trees thinned as they reached a paved road, the SUV picking up speed. And then headlights appeared behind them. A single car at first. Then another. Then three. His fingers curled around the armrest. "We've got company." The woman's grip on the wheel tightened. "Hold on." The SUV swerved hard, taking a sharp turn down an old side road. The pursuing vehicles followed instantly, their engines growling. The woman's focus remained locked on the road ahead. "There's a bridge up ahead. If we can reach it." A loud bang cut her off. The back windshield shattered. The mechanic ducked, cursing. "They're shooting at us." She didn't flinch. "Of course they are." Another shot rang out, clipping the side mirror. The mechanic's mind raced. "Do we have a plan here, or are we just waiting to get killed?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Then, she jerked the wheel hard. The SUV swerved violently, sending up a spray of dirt before launching onto a hidden gravel path. The pursuing vehicles struggled to adjust, skidding wildly in an attempt to follow. She floored the gas, the speedometer climbing. That should slow them down. The mechanic wasn't convinced. "And if it doesn't?" She exhaled. "Then we make sure they don't catch us." The road twisted sharply ahead, leading straight toward an old wooden bridge spanning a deep river gorge. The woman didn't slow down. The mechanic's breath caught. "You're not seriously thinking." She was. The SUV roared toward the bridge, the wooden planks trembling beneath the tires. Behind them, the other cars skidded onto the path, struggling to keep up. The woman pressed a button on the dashboard. For a split second, nothing happened. Then a massive explosion erupted behind them. The mechanic whipped around, eyes wide. The bridge's entrance collapsed in flames, sending debris crashing into the river below. The pursuing vehicle skidded to a halt at the broken edge, unable to follow. The mechanic's jaw slackened. "You planned that?" The woman smirked, adrenaline glinting in her eyes. "More like insurance." The SUV sped into the distance, the glow of the fire reflecting in the rearview mirror. For the first time in hours, the mechanic felt like they had a chance. The truth comes out. By the time they reached the next town, dawn was creeping over the horizon. The woman finally pulled into a secluded gas station, parking in a shadowy corner. Both of them sat there for a long moment, catching their breath. The mechanic finally turned to her. "I think it's time you told me everything." She studied him, then nodded. "I work for an organization that gathers intelligence on corruption," she said. "The kind of corruption that involves billionaires, government officials, and people who would rather stay in the shadows." The mechanic exhaled. "And that flash drive?" She tapped the dashboard. "Holds proof. Of crimes. Deals. Murders. Names of people who thought they were untouchable." His stomach churned. "And now they know I have it." She nodded grimly. "Which means they won't stop coming after you until we finish this." Silence hung between them. Then, slowly, the mechanic let out a breath. He had spent his whole life staying in his lane. Fixing cars. Avoiding trouble. Keeping things simple. But now? Now, he was at the center of something huge. And for the first time in his life, he had a reason to fight. He met her gaze. "What's the plan?" A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "We take them down." The mechanic tightened his grip on the wheel. Then let's get to work. The mechanic sat still, absorbing everything. The dim glow of the gas station lights barely illuminated the exhaustion on his face. He had spent his entire life fixing engines, tightening bolts, and living in the shadows of a world he never thought he'd be a part of. And now? He was running for his life, carrying a flash drive that could bring down some of the most powerful people on the planet. He exhaled, glancing at the woman beside him. "You really think we can take them down?" he asked, doubt creeping into his voice. She turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. "I don't think, I know." Her confidence should have reassured him. It didn't. He looked out the windshield. The roads were quiet. The town was still asleep. He had grown up in places like this, where people woke up early, worked hard, and kept their heads down. And now he was bringing a war to their doorstep. A lump formed in his throat. "If they find us here." "They won't," she interrupted. "Not yet." He frowned. "You sound sure." She smirked faintly, tapping the GPS screen. "Because I didn't take us here by accident." The mechanic's brow furrowed. He leaned forward and squinted at the map. His stomach dropped. They were right outside his town. His garage was less than a mile away. He turned to her, anger flashing in his eyes. "You brought us here? To my home?" Her face darkened. "It's the last place they'd expect." "That doesn't make it safe," he snapped. "These people, my customers, my friends, they don't deserve to be caught in the middle of this." She sighed. "I get it. But this isn't about just you anymore." He clenched his jaw. She was right. But that didn't make it easier. "We stay long enough to regroup," she continued. "Then we leave." The mechanic exhaled heavily. He still hated this. But he didn't see another choice. Back to familiar ground. They left the gas station and took the back roads, avoiding any chance of being spotted. The town was starting to wake up now, lights flicking on in windows, shop owners unlocking their doors, coffee brewing in small diners. As they pulled up to his garage, the sight of it nearly knocked the breath from his chest. It looked so normal. The rusty old sign hanging above the entrance, the familiar smell of oil and metal, the stacks of unfinished jobs waiting inside. A world he understood. A world that made sense. And yet, stepping out of the SUV, he knew he didn't belong here anymore. Still, he had work to do. The woman followed him inside as he quickly locked the doors behind them. "We need weapons," she said. The mechanic scoffed. "I run an auto shop, not an armory." She gave him a look. He rolled his eyes and walked to a rusted tool chest in the corner. Pulling out a drawer, he moved aside some old wrenches and lifted the false bottom, revealing a sawed-off shotgun and a revolver. The woman arched an eyebrow. The mechanic shrugged. "A guy's gotta be prepared." She smirked, grabbing the revolver and checking the chamber. "Good. We'll need them." He hesitated. "What exactly is the plan?" She sat on the workbench, crossing her arms. "We wait." His stomach twisted. Wait for what? Then, a deep, rumbling noise filled the air. Something loud. Massive. The walls of the garage trembled. The mechanic's breath caught as a shadow passed over the roof. The woman jumped off the workbench, her face deadly serious. They had found them. The helicopter lands. The mechanic ran to the window, his pulse skyrocketing. Through the thin glass, he saw it. A black military-grade helicopter descending into the town square. The few early morning townspeople froze, shielding their eyes against the wind as the massive rotor blades kicked up a dust storm. It landed right in front of the diner across from his shop. A few bystanders stepped forward cautiously, watching with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Then, the doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out. And then, another figure emerged. One the mechanic recognized instantly. The man from the black car. The one who had given him the business card. The one who had started all of this. The mechanic felt his stomach drop. The man adjusted his cufflinks, glancing around the small town as if he owned the place. Then, his cold gaze locked onto the garage. The mechanic froze. They knew exactly where he was. The woman grabbed his wrist. "We need to move." He swallowed. "Where?" She scanned the shop quickly, then pointed to the back entrance. "We slip out, take the alley, get to the hills," she said. "If we're careful, we can lose them." The mechanic hesitated. This was his town. His home. He couldn't just run. And then? The front door rattled. A knock. Then another. The mechanic's heart hammered. A deep voice called out. "Come on now," the man from the black car said smoothly. "No need to hide." The woman tensed. "I know you're in there," the man continued. "And I'd hate to bring unnecessary destruction to such a lovely town." The mechanic's blood boiled. That was a threat. The woman whispered, "We have to go, now." But the mechanic wasn't listening. Something inside him snapped. He had been running since the moment he helped her in the rain. Running from these people, from the consequences, from the danger. And now, they had the audacity to bring it to his home? To his town? To the people he cared about? His jaw tightened. His grip on the shotgun hardened. "No," he growled. The woman's eyes widened. "What?" He turned to her, his expression fierce. "I'm done running." He racked the shotgun, the sound echoing through the silent garage. Outside, the suited man sighed. "Have it your way." Then, the front door burst open. A swarm of armed men flooded inside. The mechanic raised the shotgun. And all hell broke loose. The garage exploded into chaos. The first man through the door barely had time to react before the mechanic squeezed the trigger. Boom! The shotgun roared, sending the intruder crashing backward into the others behind him. The woman grabbed the revolver from the workbench, pivoting smoothly and firing 2 precise shots. One man dropped instantly. The other stumbled, clutching his shoulder. The suited man outside let out a sigh, shaking his head. So dramatic. He turned to his remaining men. "Get them." More men rushed in. The mechanic ducked behind a tool cabinet as bullets ripped through the shop, shattering windows and sending sparks flying as they ricocheted off metal. "Move," the woman yelled, grabbing his arm. They sprinted toward the back exit, weaving between workbenches and overturned equipment. The mechanic felt something slam into his shoulder, hot, sharp pain. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the injury. "Keep moving." The woman kicked the door open, and they spilled into the alley behind the shop. A black SUV skidded into view, blocking their escape. The driver's door swung open. The mechanic raised the shotgun, but froze when he saw who stepped out. It wasn't just another hitman. It was her backup. A team of agents in tactical gear stormed out of the SUV, rifles raised. The woman let out a breath of relief. Right on time. The suited man inside the garage realized his mistake too late. Within seconds, the tide had turned. His men dropped their weapons as the agents surrounded the shop, rifles locked on them. The suited man held up his hands, a slow smirk playing on his lips. "Well," he muttered, "this is unfortunate." The woman stepped forward, her revolver trained on him. "You made a mistake coming here," she said. The man chuckled. "You think this ends here?" She didn't reply. Instead, she pulled out the flash drive and held it up. "I think your friends are going to be very upset when they see what's on this." For the first time, the man's smirk faltered. "You wouldn't," he whispered. She arched an eyebrow. "Watch me." The mechanic, clutching his wounded shoulder, watched as the suited man was dragged away by agents. His town was safe. The danger was over. Or so he thought. The choice that changed everything. An hour later, the mechanic sat on the steps of his garage, his shoulder bandaged, his hands still shaking. The woman sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the rising sun. He exhaled, trying to process everything. So that's it? She didn't answer right away. Then. No, she admitted. The mechanic frowned. She turned to him, her expression serious. This is bigger than one man in a suit, she said. The people backing him, they're still out there. He swallowed hard. So what now? She studied him for a long moment. Then, she pulled something from her pocket. A black envelope. She handed it to him. What's this? He asked cautiously. She smiled faintly. An offer. The mechanic opened it. Inside was a new identity. A new life. A chance to disappear. Or he could join them. Help take down the people who had turned his world upside down. For the first time since that rainy night, he realized. He had a choice. He could go back to his old life. Fixing cars. Keeping his head down. Pretending none of this ever happened. Or he could step into a world where he mattered. Where his actions could change things. The woman stood. I won't ask twice. She walked toward the waiting SUV, pausing at the door. The mechanic looked down at the envelope in his hands. He thought about the fear in the woman's eyes that night. The bodies. The chase. The helicopter. And then? He thought about the feeling in his chest when he stood his ground. For the first time in his life, he had fought back. And it had felt right. He let out a breath. Then. He stood. And walked toward the SUV, the final lesson. As the mechanic stepped into the vehicle, he realized something. Life wasn't about staying in your lane. It wasn't about waiting for things to happen to you. It was about choosing. Choosing to fight for something bigger than yourself. Choosing to matter. As the SUV pulled away, the town faded into the distance. His past, his old life, was gone. But for the first time ever, he wasn't looking back.